Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, and welcome to the DevelopSec podcast. I am your host, James Jardine, and today I want to talk a little bit about training from an application team perspective. So we have a lot of training that goes on from a development perspective. You know, developers are going to conferences, they're constantly reading online tutorials, getting up on the latest and greatest, coolest technology that exists anywhere out here. We do a lot of training, but often that training doesn't really convert into secure code training or security testing training from the QA perspective, or secure design training from the business analyst and the project owner perspectives, also including the developer perspective as well. But we don't often do that. And typically today, what we try to do is we try to say, well, developers need to have training on an annual basis for security-related topics. And that's it, right? We're requiring an annual training. Typically, this training is 2 days, 4 days, whatever it may be. And we're saying this is how we have to do security training. And typically, we focus on the developers because they're writing the code. But as if anybody that listens to me talk a lot, I talk a lot about there's much more to the development process than developers, right? We have the business analysts, we have the QA testers that are testing the code. Okay, so you can sit there and say that, oh, well, we don't have QA anymore. We do everything agile and we do this, whatever. We have all these different roles in most organizations. So we have to include all of them. We can't just look at the one thing. But, you know, it's funny. I mean, I came up with this because I was sitting here writing a blog post talking about application security and responsibility. And one of the pieces I'm talking about is getting the app teams involved. I've talked about this. I talked about it at Misty, at InfoSec World. I talked about it at IT Hot Topics up in North Carolina last month. This is something I've been talking about a lot, getting app teams involved. And so as I'm writing through this, I'm talking about getting the app teams understanding some of the security features out there, right? I mean, we run these tools, whether it's Veracode or Checkmarks or White Hat or Contrast or whoever tools you're using, Fortify. Typically, we have security doing this stuff, but it's a firm belief of mine that we can have the application teams handling these things. I mean, they're GUI interfaces. We can do this. So as I'm going through this, what's the typical reason why we don't have them doing this? And oftentimes I hear from people, oh, well, they don't understand security. They don't understand the results that are coming out of this. So really, though, what we tend to be doing from a security side is we throw tools at the problem. But as we start asking this question and start fleshing it out a little bit, really what we realize is, here's our problem. We're still not doing a good job getting us, the app team, getting involved in understanding security. So I thought about it. I'm like, man, this is a whole nother post I could do. And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm actually going to podcast about this real quick because I wanted to kind of get it out. I want to talk it through, think about some of the ideas to get them out there because, again, what are we typically doing, right? A friend of mine always says, Michael Santarcangelo, the Catalyst, he always says, right, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And when we start breaking down through this, I had this kind of light bulb moment of, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And really the problem I'm focusing on is you're saying the app teams, developers, QA, business analysts don't have the skill set available to be able to run these tools and take on some of the security burden that really should be part of their role anyway. As a developer, I should be doing secure coding. It's my app. I should feel like I should be doing this securely, right? There's lots of stuff that goes into this to make sure that's all in place. So I have responsibility for that. So typically, if we look at what's our problem, well, our problem is the team that we need doing this have the education, they don't have the experience, whatever it may be. And when I say education, I don't mean they're not smart enough, they didn't get a master's degree, whatever. It's not that. It's they haven't been really trained from the security side. They're not brought up to speed on that to start really putting that in there. And so, of course, as I start thinking about this, then I start thinking about, well, how are we doing it now? I mean, for us to focus on security training from the development teams, typically what you see, and I see it in a lot of policies, development, and typically that means developers, need to have annual security training. If you're going to write code for our software, you have to have annual security training. Now, there's no guidelines, there's no definitions, there's nothing out there to say what type of security training do we need. So typically, what do? I know a lot of places that offer security training out there, very few that actually get to the code level where we're actually teaching secure coding or secure design of the applications. No, instead, what we have is we have a bunch of security companies that are mostly from the network and infrastructure side. There may have some app side to them. They come from an infrastructure background, right? They're a red team side where they focus on the attack thing. And then they start offering these classes because somebody said, hey, we need to have security training out there for developers. And like, well, hey, we know all about security. We'll offer security training. And what that security training typically is hacking. It's penetration testing for developers. It's teaching people how to break the code. And yeah, we might give a quick recommendation of, well, you can do this. You should validate your input and you should output in code to solve cross-site scripting. But that's really typically as far as we go because, again, most of the time when we're getting these classes, it's taught by people that are the red side. They're the testing side of things. They're typically not the builders. They're the breakers. So, of course, they're going to teach us how to break. Yet, that's the training we see a lot of places. I've sat a lot of different training sessions with some different organizations, and that's typically what we see. And we have to be able to get people to understand, especially from a developer side, hey, if you can understand how we break this, that will get you thinking about it as you're writing your code, and you'll think about it, and maybe you won't do it. But that's one piece of it. But that's the piece we typically focus on when we have to check our box that says, hey, we want to be able to check the box that said we had testing performed. But is that enough? Do we need to switch this around? Is there ways that we can change this to actually get more involved and not just teach the testing side? The devs don't need to be professional penetration testers to be able to test their applications, right? That's not what they do. They need to understand concepts. They need to understand design. They need to understand security at a higher level from one aspect to be able to say, hey, when I'm building something, these are the things I need to think about, right? It's not just a this or that. It's not black or white when we're talking about security from a development standpoint. There's much more to it, right? There's multiple levels. You got a secure coding level. I need to understand my framework. I use Ruby. I use .NET. I use Java. We use Spring. We use struts. We use MVC. What is it you're using? You have to understand these type of things and make sure that they understand them. And make sure that when you're talking to them, that if you're talking to a bunch of Ruby developers and you're doing security training for them, that it's not just, hey, look, here's how to hack a PHP app. Congratulations, you just performed cross-site scripting. Yes, it's good they know how to do this, but we got to bring it to the next level. We got to start talking about, hey, here's the features of Ruby, and here's how this protects against that, and how by default it does this, so you don't have to worry about it unless you change this value, and now you've opened yourself up to vulnerabilities. But that may not matter because the way your application's designed, you're not affected. We're typically not going that far, right? So we have to start getting more into, if we're going to be providing this training, and this training is required, right? We have to have training to get up to speed, because if we don't get the app teams, and I've only been focused on developer, but we'll talk QA and BA in a minute. If we don't get the app teams performing some of the security stuff, we're always going to be broken out in these silos, and we're always going to be playing catch up, right? We're going to be reactive. We're not going to be proactive. It's going to be, we write some stuff, security test some stuff, we get responses back, we fix some stuff, they retest it, right? Why are we going back and forth so many times? We have this middleman that's in our way, that's holding us up, and there's really no reason for it. We can bring this over and start handling it ourselves, but we have to be able to understand what it is we're handling. And the great thing I want to tell you, if you're a developer, you're QA, look, security brings AppSec over to us as if it is these crazy mathematical equations that only Good Will Hunting can solve. while he's cleaning floors that are left on the chalkboard. That's typically not what we're dealing with, right? Security has multiple levels of complexity, and they all, depends on what you have. I mean, some SQL injection, that's typically pretty easy to fix, and it's a coding issue, right? SQL injection is not a business analyst issue. It's not from a development side, fixing it. It's not a QA issue. QA can test for it, but it's a code fix. It's, hey, we shouldn't do inline queries. We should do parameterized queries. Right? I can change that. Typically, it's not a huge architectural change unless your whole site's written the wrong way. But it's an easy fix. But you start thinking about things like username harvesting, those type of flaws, some other logic flaws out there. It may not just be a code thing. It may actually be a design of the system thing. So we need to start thinking about how we can draw from our experiences and provide better training, or however we're going to get this education across. Like I mentioned earlier when we started this, we start off by saying, hey, look, we're going to do two-day training, we're going to do 4-day training, we're going to slam you with security for the year, but we're going to do it over 2 days, or we're going to do it over 4 days, and we're going to cram it in there. But let's go back to what we started with. How are we typically getting our training? How many developers do you know that are going out there and getting 2-day or 4-day training within their language of choice or within their platforms to get this done? It's very rare, I think, that you're seeing that. You might see them go off to a conference or something, but most developers actually learn kind of on their own, right? I mean, they're going out, they're Googling how to do things, they're reading books, they're checking out sites, seeing blogs of how things are happening. So we have to start circling back around and thinking about, how are we doing training when we say, hey, we have to provide training for the developers? And we have to provide training for QA, because QA is important, right? I mean, they need to understand how to test. But again, we're teaching them pen testing. We're not teaching them really more testing techniques, which is fine, because when we start thinking about QA, right, QA people know how to test. We don't have to teach them methodologies for testing. They've been testing their career. So they have testing methodologies already. They just need to start understanding how they start looking for security type of vulnerabilities, looking at their apps a little differently, instead of a, hey, does it meet what the functionality says, to, hey, what can I do with this functionality? That's how we're changing that around. It's how we look at it, right? But it can't just be that all we're doing is teaching everybody how to do pen testing. This is how you attack apps, and this base layer of, hey, at least I know how to break it, I'll now magically be able to fix it. We need to do better at digging more into those concepts. But how do we do that? How can we get better at digging into those concepts? Do 2-day things work? Do 4-day things work? I'd love to get feedback from people to get their idea, especially if you are development, QA, business analyst. What's working for you? The new things out there, all this gamification. Oh man, I want badges. I want people to say how great I am because I solved a problem. Is it gamification that's working? Do you really want to get your information more from, hey, look, I'm out looking at tutorials. How can I get the information that way? Because here's the thing. We so typically separate still out security from development, right? It's rare that I'm going out and getting a tutorial on how to do proper SQL queries. I either get a tutorial on how to query a database, or I get one on how to do SQL injection or protect against SQL injection. We're still not doing both, and I talked about this a while back. I may have done a post about it where I talk about this issue of training, and the books that we use rarely have secure code examples. We don't do a good job doing that because, well, it's going to be too long, or the code examples will be too big to fit on a page, so I can't show them the right way to do it. We have to get over the excuses. We have to look at the problem. We actually have to start solving some problems for a moment. Step away from the breaking for a second. Great, we can break all kinds of stuff. We actually have to try to come up with ways to solve problems. And this is one of the biggest ones we need to look at, is how can we better educate our development staff and our application teams to get security built into our systems. Because it's not working by just sitting there throwing 2-day training or 4-day training. Most organizations will tell you that it's hard to get their developers away for 2 days or 4 days or however long your training is, right? Again, it's got limitations that it's really short time frame, right? It's 2 days and that's it. Right? I'm talking 2 days out of the entire year, I'm going to talk about security. And then quite honestly, I'm not going to talk about it again. I'm not going to think about it until a pen test comes back, and then maybe I'll bring it back up and I'll work back into it, right? This isn't working as a model. One of the things that I've been pushing, and we've been playing around with this a little bit through Jardine Software, is looking at doing training, but breaking that training down. So instead of doing a 2-day training or a 4-day training, maybe we do a day, if that makes sense, at the beginning to kind of set the stage, get everything formed together and say, hey, look, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to cover. Here's why security is important. Here's some examples of how security could affect your organization. Stuff that kind of gets the stage set for what we're dealing with, right? And then we spread out the rest of the training, right? It ends up being about 3 days worth of training total, but we spread it out across the year. We look at saying, hey, look, let's do 3 different topics per quarter. So it breaks down to 1 a month. And we'll do an hour to 2 hour session. Typically it's a 2-hour session where we're going to focus on a specific topic. So maybe we're going to focus on cross-site scripting. And we can take that and we can say, and this is live session. This isn't just some recorded cast that you get to watch of some CBT or anything. This is a live, remote usually, right? Like a go-to training type of session where we're sitting down talking about cross-site scripting. And we're going to understand cross-site scripting. We're going to understand how it is abused, how it's attacked, why it's important, different ways that we can mitigate it depending on your type of framework. Maybe we can understand, hey, you use Ruby, so this does that, or you use .NET, and we've got validate request, and we've got output encoding, and we've got input validation, and all these different things. Maybe we're using a Razor front end, right? We got all these different, we're going to understand that. And then we're going to understand typically how this is reported to us. How do you see it from a static analysis standpoint? What's coming at you? Do we get code level? Do we get dynamic analysis where it shows a response? And just think through some of the things that we would do on a daily basis if we actually started taking accountability for some of these actions, so that when you go back, you can say, hey, look, cross-site scripting, I know that if I get it in a static analyzer, here's how I go address it. Here's how I understand it. Here's how I get the root cause. Here's how I go ahead and figure out this is how I fix it, but at the same time, say I get it through a pen test. I've talked multiple times about instance versus finding. Hey, I got cross-site scripting, I got 3 of them. Learning how to understand, hey, this is what we did. This is common, right? They identified 3 things, but we actually do this all over the place. We need to go back and check our apps, make sure that we're doing this the proper way. Here's how we should have fixed it. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how we go forward with it. This ties slow into it, which is our security learning objective, right? It's got all kinds of stuff that builds in together, but we're not overwhelming. We're not getting crazy and trying to cover 15 years worth of experience in security testing in 2 days. It's not going to happen. You're not grasping all of that. It's going to spread it out. It's going to put security in the forefront on a monthly basis to say, hey, we're going to cover a new security topic. If you've got questions, here's an opportunity to ask them, get some clarification. There's so much that we have to understand that we can't do it in a short little block once a year and actually think it's going to be effective. So we need to start thinking about it. We need to start seeing, right? We've got OWASP out there. If you're a developer and you haven't seen OWASP, go check it out, owasp.org. Lots of information out there. I mean, cheat sheets that they've built up, guides to help you. We should be looking at this. If this is how you learn best, it's out there and that's free, right? That's available to you. But I'd love to get some feedback. I want to hear more from people to understand how you learn. What's the best way for you to learn? Do 2-day things work best for you? Does a 4-day thing work best? Does it work best if we spread it out, if it's tutorial? What's working for people out there? Hit me up. It's at DevelopSec on Twitter. Or you can reach out to me, james@jardinesoftware.com. Feel free to send me your thoughts because I really want to help curb this problem because we have a problem. We're not doing a good job with how we're doing the training. I think maybe at the point we're kind of doing the best we can just because we're not really digging into it and understanding the true problem, right? We said, hey, we need training, so we offer training. But now it's time that we've got some training out there. Now let's start reviewing it. What are we doing with training? How can we make that training better and make it more effective? That's one of my biggest goals is I want to make stuff effective. I want to make it efficient. I don't want to waste anybody's time. We need to get stuff done. and let's look for the best ways that we can actually do this to get things done. So that wraps up kind of a quick rant. Hopefully it's useful, talking about training and hopefully ways we can make it better. Again, reach out to me. I'd love to hear feedback. You can also hit me up on Twitter at Jardine Software, either that one or at DevelopSec. Let me know. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are for training. If you're looking for training or if you're looking for your apps to be reviewed, anything application security-wise, reach out to me, james@jardinesoftware.com. Love to talk to you. Love to find out what you guys are doing on your end so we can hopefully start maturing these processes and get better at it without external entities pushing it upon us. It's just the way we do things. So I appreciate everybody listening. It's been a while since I put one of these out, but I'm actually planning on recording a few more. I've got some in the hopper. So look for some more coming out soon. But again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you all on the next episode. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.